Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including how Kamala Harris is going to tax capital gains, why it may be a good idea, why it may not be a good idea, the real realignment within the parties, and especially on foreign policy, which I think is an interesting one as we dive deeper into understanding where the parties are before this election. And our final article talking about some lawsuits in key battleground states to fix some voter problems that the RNC sees. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So we've gone through this topic before of capital gains taxes. Should there be a cap? Should there be a limit on the amount of capital gains tax that they're actually going to use? Should there be a hard cap on the amount of money that somebody has in these stocks or different sort of asset classes that gain value over time, that we should say, okay, if you're below this floor, you're not allowed to have any of your money taken. But if you're above this floor, any of those unrealized gains, we're actually going to tax them. So with that said, let's jump into our first article. Throw those comments down there in the comment section. It comes from Mother Jones. Worried about Kamala Harris's plan to tax unrealized capital gains? Don't bother. And when I first looked at that title, I was saying, okay, what are they getting at specifically? Because as anybody who has followed this channel for quite some time, whenever there has been any proposal to come after unrealized gains, I have most definitely come and said, hey, whoa, slow your roll, big man, slow your roll. That is not something that we do here in the United States of America. We do not actively encourage the taking of people's money that has not even actually materialized yet. Because at the end of the day, if you're going for unrealized gains, that means that it is still on a balance sheet somewhere, that the stock is still written down, that it is in your name, and you haven't even gotten any of the cash yet for it. There has not even been a transaction yet, besides the buying of the stock, that allows you to really know its worth. So, why is this something that we're returning to now? Well, of course, Kamala Harris has a proposal for it, but also Mother Jones makes an interesting argument coming from the perspective of it's actually not something that you shouldn't worry about because it's not going to happen, or that it's actually a good thing, but that it only affects a certain segment of the population. So, here's what the author has to say within the very first paragraph. Quote, do you have 100 million? I don't. Heck, I don't even have 50 million, which is why I'm not worried about the likes of President Joe Biden and maybe Kamala Harris and Rep. Barbara Lee, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Ron Wyden, and Bernie Sanders, all of whom have proposed various levies on executive wealth over the past 5 years, taxing my unrealized capital gains. I do not have unrealized capital gains. Maybe you do too. My wife and I bought our house in Oakland, California about 20 years ago, so on and so forth. So the author goes through and talks about how they are not a person who has unrealized capital gains. Then again, they mention that they have a little bit of stock, which means they do, unless what they are meaning to imply is that their stocks have all done terribly, and that they would actually be able to write some of those off if they sold them, then no, they're wrong. They do have unrealized capital gains, but fair enough. They're kind of blowing past that and saying it's not a large percentage of our wealth, so we're not really worried about it. A lot of our wealth is tied up in our house value and things like that. So why? Why does the author come right out here and say it's 100 million, or I don't even have 50 million? Because there have been a minimum threshold, basically, said to be the ideal for having unrealized capital gains. If you make over a certain amount a year, then you're not going to miss those unrealized capital gains. You're just seeing your balance sheet go up anyway. You're not actually more than likely pulling that money out and actually using it in a profitable way, or using it in a way that actually add values to the economy. You're just letting it sit there and gain value on the books. That's obviously an interpretation of what the author is saying. There are other various arguments, which is we do not want to affect the common investor. And I think that is obviously the angle that a lot of people would come at the argument of unrealized capital gains being a problem. Because if you want to not discourage people from actively putting their money away into the stock market, which we've talked about before, how the stock market is honestly a lot more AI slash algorithm driven nowadays than it is inherent value of the company, but there is still some underlying faith in certain companies that have a good business plan, who have a strategic material or product that is going to be useful. I mean, that's why Nvidia has soared to the moon. Now, a lot of that is also speculation on top of the fact that they have a good product that will be very useful in a lot of different AI projects going down the road, but that doesn't mean that there's not something there that they have, and we can't just ignore that. But my point being that while the stock market does have some of that, it also has a lot of algorithms that are determining how people can make money, whether it be selling thousands upon thousands of shares for an extra penny or two on the dollar, and then using the large mass of stocks that we're doing that in order to reap some sort of profit, then yes, the stock market doesn't necessarily fully represent the reality of different companies and their inherent value, or the value proposition that they propose in the market, and people buying stock in them because they believe that they have a good business plan, they believe in the product, so on and so forth. So that would be my breakdown of where the stock market is. But the argument, whether or not you think the stock market is a true denoter of a value of a company versus a potentially inflated number, the mechanism of people being able to buy shares in the companies and be able to invest in these companies, whether it be because they have a good value proposition, whether it be because they believe that in the future that may be a strategic industry, that has been a very important process for one, allowing people to become possibly more mobile because they're able to deploy their shares into a company that they wouldn't necessarily be able to open themselves, or they wouldn't necessarily have the knowledge to open themselves, even though they could see the strategic opportunity within the market, or they wouldn't have the capital to fully fund themselves, but they can be a part of a company that is doing something like this. It's actually a good thing, a way to infuse the economy with more money, and without, and also giving people a potential gain on investment without having to just put it in a bank and watch that money sit there. Because there are certain fears that when you have just money sitting in the bank, one, if we have a constant rate of inflation, which is something that we actually aim for with the Fed, then your money's actually going to lose value. So it's a mechanism for people to at least possibly offset some of that loss in theory, but also it is a mechanism, and I keep using the word mechanism, I understand I'm probably overusing it. It is a way to ensure that too much money does not get pulled out of the economy, and that it continues to flow, so we don't run into a situation where we don't have enough supply of money within the economy to allow continual growth. Because if everybody was saying, okay, my bank is providing me a 5% interest rate, then we're going to pull that money out of the economy, and in theory, because technically the bank actually loans it back out, obviously, but in theory, the bank stores the money and it is out of the economy for the most part. The bank's obviously going to lend that out, but at the end of the day, I can still go up to the bank and take my money back out eventually, but it may actually have a little bit less value. In the stock market, this provides, in theory, once again, most of this is in theory, because in actuality, banks have a very different system of going in and deploying their money, and always in the stock market, the stocks don't always go up, but in theory, people put their money into the stock market as a mechanism to help other companies grow, give them disposable cash, but also to have a promissory note. Essentially, they have a little piece of paper that says you own X amount of shares, and if you sell X amount of shares, then there will be a certain amount of a fee, and you will get the rest, reap the rest of the profits because you bought at X, Y, and Z. So they get a promissory note and they actually get a little bit of a return on their investment, especially if the company grows. So it's a way to directly infuse the economy and companies with money rather than having to go through a bank. Now, obviously, like I said, in theory and practice, very different things. But overall, we do not want to discourage that practice because even in theory, where it's not necessarily held true that a bank is just holding your money there on the sidelines because they're giving loans out to other people, they're using your money as a way to actually make more profit because they have interest rates on their loans and things like that. But even if we dismiss the theory and we look in the real world situation, it does offer the possibility for higher returns and more direct investment and allows you for a small share slash stake in ownership of a company, which means you have a vested interest in companies that are based here in the United States and you want to ensure that the economy thrives. It also shows that at the end of the day, we believe in our own companies and it actually spurs on innovation because people want to make companies that people will actually trust and will actually make good products so then they can put them on the stock market so then they can get people's cash because people believe in them, not just venture capital cash, but people's cash, the common everyday man, in order to continue to grow their company. And they want their product to be good enough that people recognize them when they go on the stock market. And when you tax capital gains, unrealized capital gains, not just capital gains, because when you sell that stock, there even could honestly be an argument of not having to tax that because you shouldn't be taking people's investment money, or it's already been taxed once. Why would it be taxed again? Because if it's anything they got from their payroll, then of course it's already taxed money. But that's a separate argument for another day. The argument here would be, why would you want to discourage more investment within our economy? And that's why they have this floor. This is why they have this little price floor, which is, okay, under 100 million, we're not going to do it because we do want the common person to continue to invest in the companies. But my question then, if the argument is that it's still important to invest in these companies and that we don't want to actually discourage people from being able to do it and also grow their savings, why does that not apply to the million people, the people who are over a million? Are you saying that, oh, once you hit $1 million, you have enough money? I don't think that argument necessarily holds up. You never know what's going to happen. You never know if any of the companies that you have shares in are going to fall precipitously in the future. Are they making an argument that at that point it's already enough money invested into these companies and we just need to be able to take it out of the economy? Or is it pure greed? Is it just saying, no, we need this money and we think at that point you have too much, so we're just going to take it from you? I would say, and I'm a cynical person for the most part, I do have my optimistic moments, I've been over this a million times, but I'm relatively cynical. I would say that it is actually the very, very last, the former, technically there were three of them, so it can't necessarily be the former or the latter, but the very last of those options, which is, there is just a certain point where they do not want you making any more money, or they see it as if above that is not fair to everybody else. Therefore, it feels fair to us to tax it and give it back to the people, which you can make a fair enough egalitarian argument. But my question then becomes, where does it stop from there? When we start putting random floors and ceilings on these sort of decisions, what happens when no longer is it enough to tax the capital gains of the unrealized capital gains of people who are who are making over 100 million? Because this author says, I don't even make 50 million. Well, what happens when that is no longer enough to actually redistribute the wealth? Because you still have people who are making, and let's just not even go to 99 million. Let's say there's people still making $50 million in unrealized or yearly, and that's including in unrealized capital gains, which technically their value's going up on paper, but they actually realized it and therefore actually have the money in their bank account? No. So I think that's a very blanket argument as to why you don't actually need to tax it, because at the end of the day, one, that could change, but two, it's not an actual representation of what they have. It is just a whole bunch of digits on a bank sheet. It's like saying, oh, well, yeah, I have a note that says I'm owed $40,000. Does that mean that you have $40,000? No. I mean, if you took that note over to the local store and said, hey, can I get $40,000 worth of Apple products? They're going to be like, what does this note even mean? So no. And then again, you could make an argument that you can actually trade stock for things nowadays. It's not quite that simple. Fair enough. But I think that we really need to take a step back and say, okay, when we're looking at the 50 million person, the $50 million person, and we still have, because redistribution if programs don't necessarily level everything out like we would believe they would. Otherwise, we would see a lot less poverty within the United States during some of the most high tax eras, which was during the 1950s and 60s. We would actually see some of the lowest poverty rates, which we do not. We've actually seen that it was relatively stable. Then again, we have to continually adjust for the standard of living increasing, so that also messes with the statistics a little bit. But the point being that just taking money from the top and distributing it to the bottom doesn't necessarily solve all of the issues. And there will be at some point. This is speculation from my part at this point. There will be at one point. It will be okay. Now we've taken from the 100 million. It's not actually doing enough. We need to go to the 50 million people, because there are still people making $50 million a year, and there are still people making $12,000 a year, even though we've tried our best in order to help redistribute some of the money. And then it will just continue, because if the point is to actually get the money to the people at the bottom end of the spectrum, which sounds noble enough in order to actually lift them up, it sounds pretty noble. What you're going to end up doing is you're going to continue stripping the wealth from the top until the floor, the bottom, meets the top. And guess what? You're actually pulling everybody down rather than trying to lift the entire ship. And that's what happens when you have a centralized system that is so focused on trying to make all outcomes, or at least trying to equalize the system through tax policy rather than through the legal system. This is an argument that's been going on for a long time. But the question is always, do you want equal outcomes or do you want equal opportunity? And when you have a robust legal system that actually limits the people who have too much power, or have so much power that they can actually change the outcomes and therefore make things go in their favor, if you actually fix that on the legal side, which is always hard, it's an ongoing battle, but if you fix that on the legal side so that everybody has the same opportunity, then you can let people use that same opportunity in order to actually lift themselves up, rather than having to strip wealth from the top in order to give it to the bottom. And this is just another mechanism for doing that. That is what unrealized capital gains are, because these people have not even actually traded in any of their stock for money. Now, then again, that's not fair. Guess what? Elon Musk did it. Elon Musk got taxed to high heaven the second he did. Now, I understand he's also living on loans off of the money that his shares are worth in theory. But guess what? In order to pay off those loans, he still has to realize some of those gains or get taxable income from somewhere else in order to pay off those loans. So it's basically just doubling the tax on things as well, which is the principal argument, which is, no, why are you double taxing my money? I already got taxed on it for the most part, except if it's actually a compensation package where you just get stock as a compensation. And even then, you can make an argument for just taxing the stock, or the stock for the stock that is given as compensation, rather than taxing it every single year, because you're taxing that same money year after year after year after year. And guess what? Do you get taxed on that money that you pull out of your pay? When you get your paycheck, you get taxed once. You get taxed once. Then again, you could argue that inflation is a tax as well, but that's besides the point. You get taxed once. You don't get taxed on that same money if you haven't spent it by the end of the year again, do you? No, you do not. Now, if you put it into property, fair enough, you do get taxed again. You could even make an argument that property taxes aren't necessarily a good thing, but whatever. From that point on, you are getting taxed repeatedly when you have an unrealized gains tax, because guess what? You gained an extra $50 million in value for your stocks this year. And how much has it gone up from the initial value that you had? Oh, it went up by 150 million. Okay, we're going to tax 50% of that. Oh, look at that. Okay, we're going to take 75 million. And then you gain another 50 million the next coming year. And then you actually have, so if it's 75 million basically and let's be clear, the value wouldn't actually be 75 million. This value would still be the 150 million plus the other 50 million. So then it'd be 200 million. And then you see how they're starting to continually just strip the value away from your stock. And within multiple years, I mean, literally within 2 or 3 years, people could have be paying more than the value of their stock in taxes, which is just absolutely insane because guess what? They don't have ready access to that money. It is still tied up in stocks. So what is the solution? They have to sell the stocks. They have to actually liquidate those funds in order to even pay off the taxes on those funds. And then guess what? All that money is ripped out of the stock market, which causes huge issues because millions upon millions upon millions of dollars will be taken out of the stock market in order to cover the tax liability itself. It just does not work. It will not make any sense. I'm sorry that it's taken me this long to get here, but I've made plenty of arguments about unrealized capital gains before, about how double taxing money is not necessarily a good thing, how it makes no sense that an artificial floor will actually maintain, because at the end of the day, if the goal is to redistribute to the lowest part of the population economically, the people that make the least amount of money, you will continually have to strip the top until basically all outcomes are the same. Everybody makes the same amount of money. So because the argument just keeps going that way. If we are truly to look for a more equal, truly egalitarian economy, then that is what is going to end up happening. It is the logical end of the argument. And that is why we need to stop thinking in these terms, and we need to really address what the issue is, which is making sure on the legal side of things, the legal framework, the legal protections within our country allow everybody to have equal footing so that you can go and open a brand new, if you're worried about the richest among us having too much money to be able to deploy, why? Is it just because they have too much money and you want it, or is it because they have so much money that they can actually squash other people? Because if they have so much money that they can squash other people, you can still fix that on the legal side of things without having to go and strip them of their money. So that is where I'm coming from when we talk about unrealized capital gains. Sorry it took me so long. So let's get into our second article, The Real Realignment from the American Conservative. Now, this one actually just makes a few points that I think are interesting, and I'm not necessarily going to do as long of a rant on unrealized capital gains as I've done in this previous segment. So let's go to the heart of the article. Quote, more significantly, however, Democrats have decided that they hate Trump more than they dislike the foreign policy of George W. Bush. Former Republicans, who can loosely be described as neoconservatives, and their fellow travelers have increasingly gone left, who have increasingly left or been driven from the party of the Trump era. The elder Cheney's first real fight with Trump was when he confronted then Vice President Mike Pence about his boss's foreign policy at the American Enterprise Institute in 2019, that Pence now agrees has much more to do with Jan 6 than Cheney's original views do. So let's take a step back. What are they highlighting here? They're highlighting the fact that Dick Cheney, loving father of Liz Cheney and loving father of the Bush foreign policy, is now actually siding with Kamala Harris and siding with the Democrats. Now, whether that's because of how Trump actually was trying to basically get Cheney out on the Wyoming side of things and actually made it almost impossible for her to win her race. And basically, he went up to Dick Cheney's daughter and said, no, you're not going to have a place here in the Republican Party. Whether it's because it's that and it's grievance politics, or it's actually because there's a huge, vast difference between Donald Trump and the old Republican Party. I just think it's absolutely fascinating when you have key figures, and honestly, hated figures from both sides of the aisle, in going to the current opponent of Donald J. Trump and saying, even I cannot sit by and support this party, even though I was the brainchild of most of its movement throughout the 1980s and 1990s, and I have been a political animal who truly embodied some of the values of Washington. It is hilarious to me because it shows that Donald Trump is still a little bit of an outside element, that he is truly opposing the Washington establishment when it comes to very specific policies, especially foreign policy. and how the Washington establishment does not like it. Even Dick Cheney can no longer go along with the title Republican because he feels as though that the Republican Party has been changed to such a drastic degree. And like I said, he was the true embodiment of the neoconservative consensus. So it's absolutely, absolutely hilarious to me when he's coming out and saying, nope, no more for DJT. This is a man who doesn't believe in American values, so on and so forth, because he was the middle ground, do whatever Washington needs us to do. Oh, what helps the military contractors? What helps our friends already within government? What allows us to use our unitary executive power in order to achieve what we want done on at least from a Republican point of view, a small government conservative point of view, even though spending still actually went up during the Bush era. Then again, wars. So, how much do you offset that by wars? But it still went up during the Bush era. In the deficit reduction that we were doing underneath the Clinton era was out the window. Then again, it was very brief. But the point being that he was the true embodiment of what the conservative body had become, and the Tea Party movement was actually a rebellion against that era of the Republican Party, trying to get Okay, I've gone on a long enough rant about internal Republican politics. It's just hilarious. It is absolutely hilarious that not even Dick Cheney can sit back and say, you know what? I am going to vote Republican this time. Even if I don't like the candidate, I'm going to stay loyal to the party. No, he has stayed loyal to the neoconservative Washington consensus, and it is just absolutely hilarious to me. Whether or not you like Donald Trump, if you do not like the neoliberal, conservative, neocon, whatever, all that consensus that has been one of the largest lambasting points of Washington for a long time among the normal people, if you don't like it, maybe you should consider voting for DJT. Maybe you should. There are lots of things about DJT that I'm sure you and I both do not love. But if you do not want the consensus neocon, neoliberal, the ruling Washington consensus, and over the last basically 30 years, but really it's come into crystallization over the last 20 years, minus a little bit of Obama because he was also an outside figure, then maybe you should vote for DJT, because I'll tell you now, Kamala Harris is not straying from that very far. And you can tell that by who's endorsing her, aka Dick Cheney. So, with that said, it's just an interesting little article there. Let's jump into the last article that comes from The Hill. Republicans sue 3 battleground states this week. Here's what you need to know. So, I'm honestly going to do a little bit of a breakdown, quick and dirty on this one. We're going to go through each state and tell you why they're doing it. You can go read the article for yourself, just like any of the other articles. They'll be linked in the description below the like and subscribe button. Quote, Michigan. The Michigan lawsuit filed on Thursday argues Michigan's Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson, failed to require the proper verification of absentee ballots through her office's election guidance, which Republicans say omit certain requirements. And basically what they're asking for as a remedy is that you actually have to sign the outside of the envelope, and then that has to be verified by local election officials. Now, we turn to North Carolina. Quote, on Tuesday, the RNC and North Carolina State Republican Party filed a lawsuit against the State Board of Elections questioning the integrity of absentee ballot policy. The suit argues that the board revisions to absentee ballot law conflicted with state statute requiring ballots to be sealed for it to count. They've continued with this lawsuit. We'll see how it pans out, but North Carolina is actually becoming a little bit more contentious, which is once again very interesting considering it was the state that basically propelled everything forward for Joe Biden back in 2020. The fact that it's much more contentious this time, it's very interesting. I love seeing these sort of things. We love seeing the demographics and the actual electoral change throughout. I mean, it's only been 4 years, and yet so much seems to be exactly the same, and yet so much is different. So, I mean, basically, Ohio, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, would not have been a solid red. Now it's a solid red. It is always fascinating to see how things continue to change, and the RNC is trying to make sure that North Carolina is in the bag this time. All right, so let's go to Nevada. Meanwhile, quote, meanwhile in Nevada, the RNC and Nevada GOP sued the Secretary of State Secretary of State Francisco Aguilar, arguing that his office is allowing non-citizens to register to vote despite state officials maintaining there are protections in place that prevent this from happening. Quote, allowing non-citizens to vote suppresses legal voters and undermines the democratic system and violates the law, Whatley said. Republicans, however, claim that the evidence of thousands of non-citizens on the voter rolls who could cast their vote in November and influence the election outcomes. So, like I said, if you want to read any of those in the entirety, so whether it be about the lawsuits, whether it be about the real realignment, which goes into more detail about the change that Dick Cheney has gone through, maybe some of the motivations, and the Mother Jones article talking about unrealized capital gains, go ahead, go to the links in the description below the like and subscribe button. Also down there, well, normally I say that in the end, but we're not at the end because we still have to do our daily delight. This one comes from Parade Pets. Golden Retriever therapy dog melts into fur baby among NICU staff. Honestly, this little video that was attached to this article is absolutely adorable. We love it when we see a dog that is meant to aid people, that is meant to make life easier, maybe some of the issues that people are having, it's meant to alleviate some of them. When he comes in and he just turns into an instead of a stoic little pup that is there to be a therapy dog, he actually kind of gives in to the moment and really enjoys what's going on. I think that this sort of thing, spreading joy, is always good, especially when people are going through hard times. And you never know. You never know. Maybe somebody just needs to pet a dog and really appreciate the happiness that these sort of animals can bring, their naivete to the world, or the true nature of the human world, or how we perceive things. It can actually be very, very delightful and make me smile sometimes. And I'm sure that you guys want to smile as well. So go check out this as well as all the other articles. Like I've said for the third time now, in the description below the like and subscribe button, all the links are there. You can also check out the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. And if you want to hear 6 and 6, which is 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less, that comes out on Tuesday and Thursday as well at the same YouTube channel and also on the RSS feed. So with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.